welcome to our Smart Webinar series, and welcome to today's webinar, Increase Occupancy While Decreasing Cost Per Acquisition. So right now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Valerie Whitman. Valerie is a senior care executive with more than 15 years of experience in the senior living industry. And Val, I think when I wrote this bio up a while ago, it's probably more than 15. Sorry.
I don't know if I want to admit that.
Val's worked as a regional director with Benchmark Senior Living and was also National Senior Care Operations Director at Care.com. Valerie helps senior care providers maximize their customer acquisition and retention strategies using proven lead generation solutions. So welcome, Val. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Andrea and Debbie. Appreciate you having me. And thanks, everyone on the call for your time today. We're glad that you were able to carve out some time from your busy schedule, and we'll be sending everything over afterwards, so you'll have that to share with your teams or just to reference as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we jump into the meat of things, I would like to just speak to these two PDFs that will be coming to you in the follow-up email, and that would be the white paper on increasing occupancy, and that talks a lot about the industry occupancy, some of the challenges that we're all facing, and some of the solutions that are out there and available. Some of you may be incorporating them already, but so there's some really good takeaways in that white paper. And then also the second handout would be the trending report. So we try to do these quarterly, and for the most part, they're based on consumer behaviors. And so you can see there's a couple of consumer behavior data points there that can help you just, again, increasing occupancy, lowering your cost per acquisition, and really just having a better understanding of who your consumer is from a behavior perspective. And again, that's all based on data. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So look forward to seeing those handouts go out via email. And just to kind of set the stage for what we'll be talking about today, new strategies to increase your lead base, occupancy, and revenue, again, while decreasing your cost per acquisition. We'll also review a peer case study, and then I'm going to turn it over to Debbie with Senior Living Smart and talk about some of the key marketing automation initiatives that can help you. We had done a very similar presentation at the National Argentum Conference last month, and we did have one of our clients with us reviewing the peer case study. So I'll do my best to essentially be him, and we'll go through the details that he did during the live Argentum session. Okay, so just to set the stage here in terms of the data, what we do every year is look at the surveys that we do of all of our 55 plus and older attendees, adult children, and potential residents. And then we also will look at the profile from a demographic perspective. And so some of the things that we're going to talk about today came from those efforts. And just to give you an idea of some of the data points that we look at, for example, 2.3% is the average response that we achieve to educational lead generation marketing events. And those are offering both on-site and off-site, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then 12,500 is the number of prospects that attended a community event and participated in our nationwide survey last year. And then 27 is the number of unique demographic elements in the profile. We're not going to go through all 27, but there are a few key data selects that we do want to talk about, so that those can help you improve your ROI for some of your initiatives. Just to give you an idea in terms of some additional data points that Leading Response looks at and where we gather our information from. Leading Response has been around for 25 years, and they've always focused on this same target audience, this 55 plus and older, adult children, senior market, the baby boomer, pre-retiree, retiree. And the verticals outside of senior living that we're in are financial, healthcare, legal. And so, we're meeting with people that are looking at becoming age 65, and now they're educating themselves about Medicare, estate planning, wealth management. The latest segment that we're seeing a significant increase in is elective medical, so things like stem cell research. And so, similar to senior living, it's that emotional sale. It's that complex sale. There's a lot of misperceptions, and so it's really a great opportunity to be able to get the information from these folks, understand what they're looking for, and then that helps us with building the strongest call to actions and a lot of the different best practices, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Essentially, we have within our proprietary database 22 million of these baby boomers, pre-retirees, and retirees. We run about 1,500 campaigns a month across the country. When I say campaigns, those are a combination of digital and traditional direct mail efforts, but the majority of those are bringing people face to face with, for example, your community sales team members to educate them about senior living, build the relationship, and then help them take that next step of a personal visit or a one-on-one phone call with you. And on average, we print about 5 million pieces per month on the direct mail side. We do both digital and direct mail, but just to give you an idea in terms of volume, and again, just kind of our network and ability to reach out to these consumers in this segment and really have a good understanding of their personas. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the first thing that we're going to be talking about today. Okay. So as sales and marketing professionals, we're constantly reviewing our marketing plans and, of course, watching the performance of each initiative. We also see what each initiative is costing us in terms of lead, cost per tour, cost per move-in. We want to ensure that, we've got a good mix of initiatives and not just, all of our dollars in one bucket, whether that be digital or direct mail or referral partners. So it's really critical to make sure that you're managing these conversion rates and that you're able to measure them. And we know that not every marketing initiative we can easily measure, right? I mean, some of them are easier to measure than others, but of course they're all critical to that overall, marketing plan. And so what we're going to focus on today is talking about how you can increase your occupancy and increase your leads and do it in a way that drives down your cost per acquisition, because of course we know that the cost per acquisition is continuing to rise in our industry, especially when using referral sources that may be on that cost per acquisition model. So it may be free for the lead to hit your lead base, but then when it does convert, you're going to pay a fairly significant cost. Okay, so looking at one of these initiatives would be your direct mail efforts. And so, we often hear from our clients that they're struggling with the ROI for direct mail, and so they're looking at just abandoning it, quite frankly. I mean, I think we all know how frustrating it can be that, we spend a lot of money on direct mail. It's an expensive initiative and we're not getting the results that we want. And so we see a few common mistakes, and we'll talk about those a little bit. And then we'll talk about how you can change that up to be able to get a stronger ROI. So, for example, some of the things that we see with our clients in the way of direct mail initiatives would be using purchase lists that are basic demographics, and basic demographics consisting of, age, income, and proximity to community. We also see clients using postcards. You may be doing that to your existing lead base, or again with that basic demographic purchase lists. The other thing to keep in mind is, we see event times that are geared towards the adult child, but the event time is, let's say, before 6 p.m. And unfortunately, the data tells us hands down that if you're targeting adult children and you've got a time there for an event, if it is event-based, that is before 6 p.m., unfortunately, you will just really, really struggle to get those folks there because they're still busy. Oftentimes, they're still working. They may be taking care of grandkids or, running around doing errands. And so anything before 6 o'clock is really tough to attract that adult child group. And then also only offering one date, if it is event-based, offering one way to RSVP and communicate. And so again, when we think about consumers today, you want to give them options. You want to make sure that you have more than one way to communicate. Have that URL on the mailer, a landing page that's specific for, again, whether it's event-based and they're RSVPing or it's to download relatable content. A lot of you have really great content that you want to be able to provide folks. And so it's a great way to attract them to your website, but just make it very easy for them so they're not hitting your homepage and then having to, kind of navigate and find what they're looking for. You make it very easy and specific for them. And so, seeing some of the other common mistakes would be seeing what we would call weak call to action. So things like call us for more information. And unfortunately, we just don't see a strong response rate there. And direct mail is still a great way to communicate with this audience. I was talking to one of our large national clients a few weeks ago, and it was interesting. She was mentioning that, they had done some pretty significant analysis of their leads and lead sources and conversion rates and all of those things. And they were finding that they had really shifted a significant amount of their marketing budgets to digital. And what they found was, certain digital efforts certainly did have some good ROI, but overall what they were finding is that, this audience is still very much a traditional audience in the way of, still receiving direct mail, still wanting to communicate with us by phone. And so we want to keep that in mind, that although we're moving, not just our industry, but just society in general, is moving to so much of a digital platform, that you don't want to forget about some of those other traditional efforts, because this consumer segment, our consumer segment in our industry, is still very much about the traditional communication modes. And so just keep that in mind as you're looking at where you're shifting your dollars and what's working well for you versus what you're feeling is just not producing what you need it to and can be a high cost. And again, direct mail certainly can be a high cost. Okay, so what we see in many cases is, that low response rate, the high cost with poor ROI, and few attendees, again, when it is event-based. And we do see that the strongest call to actions would be event-based. They're going to be educational content. We'll talk a little bit more about, specific call to actions that work really well. But also, seeing the difference in psychological barriers of on-site versus off-site. And so, essentially, when we're doing these direct mail campaigns and we're not getting the results that we want, we're seeing that low response rate, the high cost, and poor ROI, as well as, unfortunately, we're hearing from clients that in some cases they're only yielding 7, 8, 9 attendees at their event. And, our community sales teams do just as much work to attract 50 people to an event as they do, 10 people. And so, of course, you want to make sure that you're yielding as many leads in the audience as you can. And again, we'll talk about some best practices that can help you do that if you are experiencing some of these, challenges to your direct mail initiatives. Okay, so let's review, certainly what can be done to make these adjustments, and you'll be surprised that these adjustments are things that you can incorporate today with your marketing plan and with your teams in the field. We're going to go back to the slide again where we talked about common mistakes, and we'll talk about what you can do instead of some of these things that you may be finding aren't yielding what you need them to. So, for example, we'll talk about the purchased mailing lists and the use of basic demographics. Many of you may be familiar with what's called additional data selects or specialty data. Sometimes clients will tell us that they're familiar with it, but it becomes cost prohibitive. And so, what I'm referring to in the way of data selects would be beyond basic demographics. So, again, basic demographics are the age, income, and proximity to community. But what you can do is go well beyond that and look at things like ailment data, familial connections, veterans, spouses of. You can also get very granular on the financial side of demographics, where not only can you do things like, home value, you can also find home equity. Because nowadays, you may have someone that is living off their second mortgage, or they have a reverse mortgage, or things like that that would impact their ability to cover the cost of senior living. And so when you're targeting these folks, you want to make sure that you have as much information about their financial snapshot as you can. And so again, those are just a handful of some additional data selects, or what's known as specialty data, that you can tap into well beyond the basic demographic. So that's definitely one key thing to keep in mind, is to absolutely look at increasing your targeted efforts as it relates to the purchase lists. And then also what you're sending for direct mail. So again, oftentimes, postcards are sent out to increase your uh, engagement with your existing leads, but also could be for a purchase list. And at the end of the day, certainly postcards are the cheaper option, and sometimes they can be effective depending on the campaign. But what we find is that at the end of the day, they're considered junk mail. I mean, if you think of yourself as a consumer, you're looking at your mail. On average, it's 11 seconds that you're determining 3 piles. And one pile is junk. It's that obvious junk mail, usually the oversized postcards, the flyers, those immediately go in the trash. And then your second pile is, this looks important. It's, a statement, an invoice, something from the insurance. Okay, I need to, hold on to that. And then your third pile, and that is that pile that is, okay, this looks interesting. I want to put this aside because I want to take a closer look at it, when I have a moment. And that is where you want your direct mail piece to be in, whether it's event based or, whatever the call to action is. And so what we find is that letter style invitation package that's personalized has a read rate of 78% versus a postcard that has a read rate of 54%. So again, just knowing that information and gauging that when you're deciding, okay, do I want to spend the money on a postcard, or do I want to spend, the money on letter style personalized package that will have a higher open rate? So again, just understanding the consumer behaviors and being able to achieve that highest response rate. And then in terms of the content and the creative of that mailer, you want to be mindful again of those consumer behaviors. And so things like start times. If you are targeting the adult child, definitely host at 6 or even 6:30. Either of those times will have a much higher response rate than anything sooner than 6 o'clock or earlier than 6 o'clock. And again, that's when it's events based, and you can do some other call to actions. It's really depending on what your effort is. If you're a new community in that particular market, you're trying to raise brand awareness, and you just want to be able to have that brand recognition, then a postcard may be the way to go, because you can get your color schemes and your logo out there, so it starts resonating with the consumer. And of course, you want to do that more than once, because it typically takes 3 or more times for a consumer to see your brand and then remember it and start building that recognition. Also, offering 2 dates. Again, if it's event-based, and I continue to go back to events simply because that is the highest call to action response rate that you'll be able to achieve. People want the education. They want to be able to meet the community team in person, whether it's on-site or off-site. We'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But in terms of the events, offering 2 dates, again, give the consumer an option, because oftentimes what we'll find is if you have just the one date on that mailer and they have a conflict, but they may have an interest in your community and learning more about senior living, unfortunately, that mailer is going in the trash. They're not going to reach out to you and say, I have an interest, but the date doesn't work for me. It's going to just become a missed opportunity for you. So you really want to be able to give them 2 dates. Yes, it means you're going to host 2 events, and that's 2 times the work for your community team, but you'll be able to yield a higher response rate and, again, decrease the missed opportunities for someone that might just have a scheduling conflict, but did have an interest in senior living and in your community. And then in terms of the call to action, so, it's talking about things that people have misperceptions about. So it's the cost of senior living. It's how do you cover it? It's talking about how do you have the conversation with a loved one, the family dynamics that oftentimes exist. So going into those various topics so that people have a clear understanding of what they're going to learn about. And then, of course, your presentation for your event and your educational seminar, you want to make sure is going to cover those pieces of information, because again, as a consumer, your time is valuable. If you're going to go to this event, you want to make sure you leave there feeling like, you know what, I'm glad I came. I got the information I needed. I learned a lot, and now I'm ready to take that next step to, schedule that personal visit or that next step of a phone call to learn more about my specific family situation. So those are all critical things that can help, again, increase your response rate and your overall leads generated from a campaign like this. And then the other piece of it is give them an option to communicate with you. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. So don't just put a trackable 800 number on the mailer. Make sure that you give them another way to communicate with you. And ideally, it's a specific landing page that has a short URL that you've got in your creative that they can go on and see something that is more specific to them. And again, if it's event-based, it could be a way for them to RSVP on that landing page. It could be downloadable content that is going to be useful and helpful for them versus just sending them, to xyz.com, your, main website, and have them try to maneuver around and find what they're looking for. And then the last thing to mention would be that on-site versus off-site. And so again, with psychological barriers, we know that there are folks that are simply not willing to step foot on the community property until they have more information and have some type of rapport or relationship built with a community team member. And that's simply because there is this kind of, anxiety provoking feeling about senior living, especially if you're the adult child, you're in that, role reversal of having to make decisions for your loved one, or if it's IL or 55 plus active adult and, it's that senior who is just a little skeptical. And so they want to meet in that neutral location that's off site, that's social, that's familiar to them. And then they're interested and willing and ready to take that next step. So, for us as senior living providers, we of course want to have people on site. We got to get them in the door to tour them and to close them and all those things. And we know that. But oftentimes you've got to be able to meet them where they're at and understand those psychological barriers so that you can get them on site. And so what we recommend there is, offering 2 dates, have one date on site and the other date off site. And what I mean by off site is a neutral Italian-American middle-of-the-road cuisine that's, a 15 or 20-minute drive time from the community. Consumer behaviors tell us they will not drive more than 15 or 20 minutes to attend an event like this. Again, if it's an adult-child audience, you'll be hard-pressed to get them there before 6 p.m. And so what you'll find is you'll have kind of 2 groups of people. One is that group that is saying, yes, I want to come on site. I want to experience your dining program. I want to try the food. I want to understand the culture. I want to interact with your residents and your associates. And then you've got your other group that is attending off-site because they're saying, I'm not ready yet to go on site, so I need the information first and build a rapport with your team before I then, venture onto the community site. So again, opportunities to get more people to respond and increase your ROI from an effort like direct mail, which, believe it or not, is still very, very effective. And we're going to look at some data points that will speak to that. So to give you an idea, a few financial stats here, these are our averages for our clients in the senior living space, just from a financial demographic perspective. So for example, 68% of the leads have a household income of more than $75,000. 44% have more than $75,000 in home equity. 64% have income producing assets, or known as IPA, in excess of $250,000. And keep in mind that IPA does not include the home asset, since that's not generating income for them. So these people in this bucket that have, $250,000 in IPA also have their home asset. And as we know in our industry, oftentimes people sell their home to cover the cost. And then the last data point would be the 76% have a net worth of more than $500,000. And of course, the net worth speaks to everything that they have, whether it's liquid or, property type of asset. So as you can see here, really, this is just to give you an idea of the type of targeted efforts and what you can achieve in terms of just the financial criteria for leads that would be attending, again, whether it's an educational seminar or any type of call to action where they're going to download relatable content or somehow engage with you so that you're able to capture them as a lead and nurture them through the sales cycle. And so by making slight adjustments, you can achieve these results that we're seeing for our clients in terms of the targeted efforts. This next slide is to give you an idea of the heat maps. This is a client we have in Connecticut, and just to give you an idea of what we look for. And again, these are just a handful of the data selects. We can go well beyond this, but just to give you an idea for an adult child target audience, you can see age 55 to 69, income is 75,000 or more, income producing assets is 250,000 or more, and in a 10-mile radius. that yields about 31,000. Now we can tell from that high number that they likely don't draw from as far as 10 miles. Their primary market is probably more like 5 to 7. So we would dwindle that down. But just to give you an idea, when we take an initial look in a market, this is what we can get, and this is what you can't get with basic demographics. And so those last two data points there, you'll see total reported ailment of 2,000, and then total reported family connection of about 5,600. And essentially what those two data selects are is self-reported data by the adult child with demographics based on the senior. So to give you an example for ailment data, that's where the adult daughter has taken mom to the neurologist. She has a formal diagnosis of dementia. The adult child is going to go home and start researching online, make purchasing behaviors, identify herself as an adult child who has a loved one suffering from, in this example, dementia. Could be Parkinson's, CHF, COPD, any of those typical ailments that we see folks moving into senior living with. And so essentially that adult child is who you're targeting versus the senior. And of course that senior's ailment information and contact information is protected by HIPAA. And so it's just another way, again, to really hyper target to get the best audience in front of your sales teams as you can, well beyond the basic demographic. Last one being family connection. Again, same thing there where the adult child lives in the same proximity as the senior. We know that there is a pretty strong percentage in our industry of seniors that live in the same area as their adult child, so you want to be able to capture those. And there's certainly a growing percentage as well of folks that are moving their loved one closer to them as the adult child. So again, anything you can do to get more granular with your targeted efforts, and then of course incorporating the consumer behaviors that we were just talking about is also important to have that strongest response rate. Okay, so this is a snapshot of our database, what our clients look at prior to, in this case, an event-driven campaign. So this was an IL client in Texas, and essentially what they're able to see because of the targeted efforts is before they even meet with this lead at the event, they're able to see some of the demographic information as well as their contact information. So because of the targeted efforts that we go through, we are able to then tie that person back when they RSVP to a campaign, and it ties back their demographic. So you can see in this instance, it's Venkata coming to an event with spouse Usha, and Venkata is 78 years old with income of 75,000 to 100 and income producing assets of 2 million or more. So, from a sales strategy perspective, it's great for your sales team to have access to this so that they have an idea from a demographic perspective who they're working with before they even meet this family, and learn more about their needs and wants, and cultivate and nurture that relationship. To speak a little bit about the consumer behaviors and what you'll see in that trend report, now that you have that very hyper-targeted list of qualified prospects, it's crucial that you understand, as I mentioned before, the psychological barriers, the preferences, their needs for information. And one of the things we are seeing that is starting to shift, which I hope continues to, is that we are seeing more folks being willing to come on site when you have that offering of either on site or off site. And in the past, probably 3-4 years ago, we would see a very low response rate. If you did everything exactly the same, the invitation, the content, the targeting efforts, everything, and the only difference was that it was being hosted on site, you would have very, very few responses to the on site offering. And keep in mind that these are people that are financially qualified. They don't need to go to the off-site restaurant location because they want that free meal, or what we would call plate lickers. These are people that can afford to go there and dine on their own. They don't need to sit amongst strangers who, although are in a similar life situation, are strangers and learn about senior living. And so we really find that, those are people that just don't want to take that first initial step on site. But so we are seeing that shift that we're seeing, and I'll show you an example in a moment, where people are more willing to come on site. And I think just in general, senior living is maturing, and so people are understanding that it's not the old style skilled nursing facility where, you promised your mom or grandmother that you'd never bring them there. So hopefully we'll continue to see that trend upward where people are willing to go on site. We all have beautiful communities and great dining programs, and so certainly want to be able to get people on site as well. And so let's talk a little bit about the ROI chart. And this is an average of what we see for our clients in senior living nationwide. And just kind of gives you an idea. I know there's a lot of data on this. Again, you'll be receiving these afterwards. But just to give you an idea of what a direct mail campaign looks like for our clients is an average 2.3% response rate, which we've been very conservative in this example of looking at 1.5 or 2. And looking at the targeted effort, so we look at about 7,500 is a typical campaign size. Now you can go lower than that, you can go higher than that. Really depends on the needs of your community, of your market, if you're a new development versus established. And so those are all things that we would work with you directly on. But essentially 7,500 is an average quantity for a campaign. And so what we achieve for our clients is in this example, let's say the 1.5% response rate on a mailer of 7,500, you're going to see the 113 seminar attendees. Now, keep in mind that this would be over the course of 2 dates because, again, you want to give the consumer the option. So having an audience of, 55 in each event date is great. And that way you keep it manageable. You can build a relationship with them. They don't have that anxiety of being in a room of, 100 people or more. And what we see with those RSVPs is that next line there of 68 near-term decision makers. So that is a 60% of one-to-one lead from your overall RSVPs. Because oftentimes people will bring a family member influencer as a guest, or it might be a couple moving into IL. So we typically average about 60% of your overall RSVPs being one-to-one leads or potential move-ins. And then what our clients average for an inquiry to tour is a 40% conversion. So that's the 27 you see here. And then next line would be the conversions of tour to move-in, and our clients average a 25% conversion there. And keep in mind that, if you've got communities that are touring at a higher than 25% rate of tour to move-in, then you can expect that these leads would follow suit as well, because obviously the community's showing very well, the staff is very engaged, and the residents are happy and active, and all the things that we know are a great recipe for success in terms of high tour to move-in rates. Then the next group of numbers here you can see would be cost. So marketing program costs for us are per piece basis. So we do 85 cents per piece. And in this example of 7,500 mailers, that equates to $63.75. Now in this example, this would be an offsite example. So you'll see that meal cost is $30 per head on average. And if you're doing it on site, typically your raw food cost is about a third of that. So again, some different ways to manage your costs, but also speak to the consumer behaviors and psychological barriers. So you can see in this example, it would be a total investment of $97.50 with your food cost included. And this is not the type of campaign that you do, this is not your monthly marketing event that you've got on the calendar that the community teams need to execute. One, of course, it's cost prohibitive, but two, because you're going to yield an influx of leads. I mean, when you think about, 68 families, essentially, you want to be able to make sure your community sales team has the bandwidth to be able to follow up and nurture these leads, because of course it's not the only lead source that's coming in the door. So on average, it's, once a quarter if you're a new development. If you're established, it might be twice a year. And depending on how your other lead source strategies are doing, you may not need to do this more than once a year. For example, we certainly have plenty of clients that will budget this once a year to get them that influx of leads. And then the next group of numbers here, you'll see we break it down simply so that you can compare it to what you're doing now with your efforts and also against the industry averages. So, cost per lead, we're averaging about 144 against an industry average of in the 400s. Cost per tour industry average is in the 800s. You can see here we're about 360. And then cost per move-in, especially if you're using digital aggregators or any type of referral, cost per acquisition type of model, is anywhere from 3,500 and up. So again, it's just a good way to be able to compare what you're seeing for your direct mail efforts. Last group of numbers here would be the average lifetime value. So we use the industry averages of $3,600 a month in rent for a length of stay of 22 months and an average of 25% NOI or gross margin. And you can see in this example, the ROI would be 13 to 1. So really the goal of this slide here is to help you see that these are achievable with direct mail. And so, you've got to make those changes if you're not seeing these types of results with your direct mail efforts, and look at the call to actions, look at your targeted efforts, look at the mail piece itself going out, because all of those components are critical to be able to achieve these types of results. Okay, so I just want to review a couple of slides on the peer case study, and then I'm going to turn it over to Debbie for the marketing automation piece. So this is a snapshot of our database, which is an RSVP portal that our clients have access to in real time as those leads are coming in, and then they can see their contact information, see the demographics, as I showed you a few slides back, but also have some additional tools like mobile check-in feature and things that can help them just kind of manage these leads. So this example is of an IL community. Now, keep in mind that they started out with the invitation for this campaign with 2 event dates. And because of the response that they had, they ended up adding 2 additional dates, or what we'd call overflow waitlist dates. So always a great problem to have. But in this instance, you can see that they had a large campaign mailer of just over 10,000. This was a new development, again, for IL. And they achieved a 1.19% response rate. So anything in the world of direct mail that's between 1% and 3% is considered successful. We averaged 2.3%, so this was actually below our average, but still, as you can see with the numbers here, it was still a very successful campaign. And so they yielded 124 registrations. You can see the majority of those 117 were reservations. So we have a 93 to 96% show rate to these events. So the majority of people that RSVP will attend the event. And you can see here that, as I mentioned, they had to add 2 additional dates. So, they had 117 reservations over the course of 4 event dates. So as I mentioned before, keeping that audience size manageable so your teams can build a relationship, but also so that the attendees aren't feeling overwhelmed and have it be anxiety provoking. And so this is just, again, to give you a snapshot here of what that campaign yielded for these for this client. Now, these were off-site. The next example I'm going to show you is a snapshot of a campaign. You can see here 2 event dates, and they hosted 1 on-site and 1 off-site. And so you can see here down below, they achieved a 0.87% response rate, so a little below the 1%, and it was still a fairly large quantity of 8,500 that went out. So they yielded a total of 68 reservations over the course of the 2 event dates. And to break that down a little further, you can see the 2 event dates here. So the top event date, note the time, and again, this was an IL community, so they offered 1 at lunchtime, so 11:30 or noon are good times for lunch. And then the evening event was 6 p.m. offsite. And so you can see the difference in numbers here. You have 19 reservations for the on-site lunchtime, and then you've got 49 reservations for the off-site dinner time. And so, drilling down, and in this example, we're not able to, but if we were to click on this 19, you would see that the majority of these people were the potential resident. They wanted to come on site, see the community, get a sense of the culture, try the food. And of course, 11:30 is great for a senior who's retired. Then on the other side, you've got 49 reservations. So this is going to be more of your adult children. In some cases, the seniors coming with them because, of course, they want to come together, but the adult child wasn't able to come to the lunchtime. And then there's also that, psychological barrier with the adult child of coming on site. And so you can see that, there were many more adult children and seniors that were going to 6 o'clock off site, again, with the psychological barriers, but being able to offer these 2 different times, different locations, and still receive the same content, meet the same community team members, essentially have the same experience, you're able to yield a higher number of leads from that campaign had you only offered 1 date and it being on site and, at a time that was not going to be conducive to your target audience. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Debbie, and she's going to talk about marketing automation and really how to, support your existing leads and nurture them and understand their personas. So let me just switch screens here. And Debbie, if you don't mind, I'm going to...
Can you click through, Val? Would that be okay?
Oh, sure. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank
Probably
you.
easier.
Yeah. So, hi everybody. It's Debbie Howard from Senior Living Smart, and just looking at the events, a lot of people ask the questions of, what should the topic be? What kind of speakers or themes should we be looking at? And so a lot of it is really considering your personas. We know that there are different people involved in the journey, the decision journey. And so looking at your audience, the first thing to do is to think about, are you going to be doing these events for the prospective resident themselves? If you're an IL or a CCRC, that may be your primary audience. Are you going to be doing this event for the adult child, primarily the adult daughter? We're even seeing in some cases grandchildren are being brought in to do some of the research components, especially through the social channels. And each of these influencers has a different set of interests, and different topics are going to appeal to them. So really thinking through, who do you want to attract? That should be your first step, and then building the themes and the topics would go from there. So if you can advance it, Val, to the next slide. We're even finding that even this is within the adult child influencer. They all have different drivers. So you're going to find that sometimes your audience is more pragmatic. They are very linear. They're very organized. This is kind of an intellectual exercise. They want checklists. They want to do the right things. They want to be informed. And the type of things that they're interested in are, very kind of, you know, informative, just the facts, just the information. I don't want any fluff kind of events, and they will most likely go to an external event. Whereas, if you're finding that primarily you're dealing with people that are more on the emotional side, more the caregiving persona, you may want to have different topics, and they may be more interested in coming into the community because they're going to want to see the other residents, and the lifestyle is going to be much more important to them. And the messaging that they're going to be more interested in is things like how to have the conversation, how to make a good decision, how not to feel guilty, all of those things. So when you think about your topics, just think about your audience, and that's a great place to start. And then you can click the next one. Also, keep in mind of where people are in the funnel. So are you looking to refill your pipeline with early stage leads that are going to take a while to nurture because you're finding that the lead volume is a little bit low through other channels? Or are you really looking for some quicker move-ins and you need people that are more in a consideration stage or a decision stage? You'll find that where people are in their journey will really dictate the topics of interest. So people who are just in the very beginning awareness stage are interested in research topics, things like an overview to senior living options. Should I stay or should I go? Pros and cons of aging at home versus in a community. Topics about finances. How am I going to pay for it? What are the funding sources? What do I have to do to prepare? People who are in the consideration stage may be more interested in transitional topics. What am I going to do with the stuff? And, preparing the house for a quick sale. How do I find the right community? What questions should I ask? And in the decision stage, they're much more willing to be in the community because they're, at the point of knowing they have to make a decision, and it's really coming down to the when and where. So I would say if you're, looking at refilling your pipeline with people in the early stages of research, you'll probably want to have those topics outside at a different venue. We worked with Valerie in a very rural environment in the middle of nowhere, Texas, and she outsold the event. And we had it at a country club, and everybody was thrilled. Whereas people who are in the consideration and definitely the decision stage, they're more likely to want to come in and get a sense of the lifestyle of the community. So those are some things to kind of keep in mind as you're building kind of your themes. And the next one, Val, if you don't mind, how to really promote your event. So one way is you can put a landing page on your website under your community location that's hosting the event. And you can even have a pop-up or a banner or something on the website with a call to action that people can click and lead to this this RSVP. So you're driving all of this traffic to your website. Let's go ahead and convert that traffic from anonymous visitors into people who will actually sign up for the event. Once they enter this and they submit this to this landing page, they would then get entered into a workflow. So we can take a look at that next. So this is a typical workflow. I just mocked something up to show you what it's like. But as soon as somebody registers for the event, they're put into that event workflow, and they're going to get a thank you for registering, remind them what they registered for, give them the date. You could probably have a calendar link to make sure they can put it in their calendar, and let them know it's fine to bring a friend. And then you can also have a marketing automation workflow built for follow-up. So after they attend the event, you can upload the list of attendees and make sure that everybody automatically, the next morning, they wake up to, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. We'd love to, visit with you personally. Love to invite you to the community. Click here to select the date and time, and then promote your next event and lead them to the landing page or call to action where they can reconvert onto the next event. So marketing automation is a great way, to kind of reinforce, because it's not so much about the event. So often we spend all this money on the event. It's really about the follow-up. If we don't follow up, it's just missed opportunity. So if you need any help with that, just let me know. Okay, what's next, Val? Yeah, making sure that you're promoting all your events through your social channels, because really you have to be everywhere. That's one thing in today's marketing. It's not just about one channel. If you're having a great event, you probably want to do a display ad in the local, newspaper. You may want to put it on Facebook. We have a client that we're building a website for, and they're actually just feeding their Facebook post right to the website. So right there at Verena at the Glen, you can see that there's a monthly veterans breakfast, and people can just click on that. It can go into their Facebook feed, and they can actually RSVP right from Facebook. So that's what I have, and now we will open it. I'll turn it back over to Andrea and see if we have any questions. If you do have any questions, be sure to click to type them into the questions box. And I think Andrea has a couple. So Val, can you tell us a little bit more about the ailment data and kind of what type of information we can get, and how we would use that in kind of informing that maybe the topic of an event?
Sure. So the ailment data, we get questions a lot about this because it is something I think that our industry is becoming more familiar with. I know, 4 years ago when I started with Leading Response, I was not aware of ailment data, and I remember thinking, my gosh, how great would this have been had I known when I was, regional ops or regional sales director, to be able to incorporate this. And so, it is something that I think we're becoming more aware of, but it's also somewhat cost prohibitive. And so essentially what ailment data is and how you can get it is the self-reported data, usually by the adult child, where their purchasing behaviors, their consumer behaviors. So in the example of dementia as an ailment data, it could be that they are purchasing books about dementia and being the loved one of someone suffering from dementia, as well as signing up for online newsletters, for support groups. I mean, any of those things that essentially are identifying them as being a loved one of someone suffering from that particular ailment. And so that tends to be in our industry, of course, who we're going to be targeting. It's that adult child, not the senior who is suffering from that particular ailment. And that's the contact information that we're able to get and to target through these types of efforts. And so that's essentially what ailment data is. To be able to get it, it is certainly more costly than your basic demographic list. There's no question about it. Fortunately, leading response, because of the volume that we do with list providers like AccuData, Experian, Epsilon, which are all, those are the three largest list providers, and anyone can go to them and say, I want a specialty data list and have it consist of ailment data and familial connections and some of those other things. But it does tend to be more costly versus leading response going to those list providers because we have such volume and such economies of scale. So I couldn't tell you what the kind of retail cost is, but I can tell you it is available, and you would want to look into that in terms of what the cost is. You can see from our example, our per piece price is 85 cents, and that includes everything but your food costs. So for us, that includes things like ailment data, familial connections. It includes the letter style packaging that has the client brand standards on it. Leading response is essentially behind the scenes. It includes the printing of those campaigns, the postage, the call center where we take all of the RCPs, make all of the reminder calls, which is based out of our Tampa office, and then the portal that I showed a few snapshots of where your communities can see in real time who these leads are and have ways to upload those to your CRM or actually have them push directly in real time to your CRM. So just to give you an idea, that's built in for us. We are not a purchase list provider, so you wouldn't come to leading response to say, I want a purchase list for ailment data. That would be going to, an AccuData, Experian, Epsilon type of list aggregator. So I hope that answers the question. I hope that provides more information, but I would strongly recommend, if you're looking at purchase lists, to definitely go beyond basic demographics and, get as granular as your budget will allow, because there are a lot more, specialty data points out there, as we mentioned today.
Great, Val. Another question, are guest speakers recommended for these seminars?
Great question. So we oftentimes find that you really don't need a guest speaker. I mean, again, it depends on the goal of the event and what you're trying to achieve and educate. So certainly if you're a standalone memory care community and you have a local memory care expert, maybe it's a professor or someone that can speak to the latest clinical trials or some program that you may have trademarked. We have a few clients that have specific dementia care programs, kind of care for the caregiver and that type of thing. So you may have a guest speaker in those instances, but often what we find that the consumers are looking for at these events is truly to learn more about some of the topics that we talked about earlier. And it's, the basic understanding of what are the differences in the care levels, what are the costs, and how do people fund the costs? It's basically the consumer saying, help me understand how I can make this work for my family because I just don't have enough information. And then it also allows you to provide more information, not only about senior living in general, but about your community and educate them so that then they are ready to take that next step. The downside of having a guest speaker is that you don't have the opportunity to do that. You might have 5 or 10 minutes of the presentation to talk about your community and what you offer, but it doesn't allow the guests to really leave there feeling like I have a much better understanding about senior living and how to cover the costs and have the conversations with my family and all of those things. They'll certainly have a lot more education about that guest speaker's content, again, an example of memory care, but we find actually that those that do not have a guest speaker, which is the majority of them, have a higher response rate because it allows them to have more of that kind of general information for the attendees.
Great. That's it for questions, Val. Thank you so much for your time today. Someone just popped in and asked if it will be recorded. Yes, we will be sending out a recording as well as a PDF of the presentation out by the end of the day tomorrow. Val, thank you so much for your time today. And Deb, thank you for your insight. And everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.